A voice echoes from a papyrus scroll over 3,000 years old. It says, "I know the secret name that launched the sun. This is just one whisper from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, a text far more mysterious than its name suggests. It is not a book of endings, but a detailed guidebook for the greatest journey imaginable, filled with spells, maps, and warnings for navigating the afterlife." Today, we are unraveling 30 of its most profound mysteries. By the end, you will understand the hidden codes and cosmic visions that shaped an entire civilization's quest for eternity. We will explore why gods are drawn with their heads turned backward, what a second death in the underworld truly meant, and how a simple beetle held the key to resurrection. What is your deepest question about what lies beyond life? That secret name of the sun was first whispered not on papyrus, but carved in stone deep inside the oldest pyramids. This is where our first great mystery begins. Long before the Book of the Dead existed, there were the pyramid texts. Imagine the absolute silence of a burial chamber over 4,000 years ago. The walls are not blank, they are covered, floor to ceiling, in columns of intricate hieroglyphs, a sea of spells meant solely for the king. These were not decorations. They were functional, a kind of spiritual machinery etched into the very architecture to propel the pharaoh's soul directly to the stars. They were his exclusive property, a royal ticket to the afterlife. So here lies the puzzle. For over 1,000 years, this celestial knowledge was locked away in stone, reserved for the god-king alone. Then, something profound changed. By the time of the New Kingdom, around 1550 years before the Common Era, these same spells, and many new ones, were being written on papyrus scrolls and placed in the tombs of nobles, officials, and even some skilled artisans. The sacred words had escaped the pyramid. They had been, in a sense, democratized. Why, what cosmic shift in belief could explain this? One theory points to a period of political instability, a time when the central power of the pharaoh weakened. As royal authority faltered, perhaps the monopoly on the afterlife did too. People began to believe that the divine magic of the pharaoh could be accessed by others, if they only knew the right words. Another theory suggests a more personal evolution in religion. The afterlife was becoming less about a distant star and more about a personal judgment, a trial every soul would face. The spells became less about royal power and more about moral preparation, guidance anyone would need. This was a revolution in thought. It meant eternity was no longer a birthright of kings, but a potential destiny for all who could afford the scribe and the scroll. The pyramid texts were the root, and the Book of the Dead was the branching tree, its leaves offering shade to many. But this democratization came with a new, terrifying responsibility. If everyone could face the gods, then everyone could also fail. Failure in that divine courtroom was not merely a denial of paradise, it was the threat of a second, permanent death, an erasure so complete it was the ancient world's ultimate terror. But what if the spells meant to protect against that fate were themselves incomplete? This brings us to our second profound mystery, the legend of a lost original. The Egyptians themselves whispered of a text far older and more potent than any funerary papyrus. They called it the Book of Thoth. In myth, Thoth was the god of wisdom, magic, and writing, the divine scribe who recorded the verdict of the afterlife judgment. His book was not a guide for the dead. It was said to contain the fundamental secrets of the universe itself, the formulas for understanding the gods, commanding the elements, and perceiving the true nature of reality. The spells in a human's Book of the Dead, then, were perhaps just fragmented copies, faded echoes of this primordial divine knowledge. Think of it like finding a single page from a master architect's blueprint. You can see instructions for building one wall, but you have lost the vision for the entire celestial city. This connection transforms how we see the papyri in museum cases. They are not just ritual texts, they become precious, broken shards of a god's own library, hinting that our understanding of their afterlife is only a shadow of a much grander cosmic doctrine. This legend was so powerful, it fueled searches long after the fall of the pharaohs. Greek and Roman authors wrote of hidden vaults and cursed attempts to possess the Book of Thoth. Even in the early 20th century, archaeologists excavating in Egypt would sometimes joke about looking for the mythical tome, a testament to its enduring grip on the imagination. The truth is, we may never find a physical Book of Thoth, but its legend forces a haunting question. If our known spells are merely derivatives, what unimaginable knowledge was contained in the original? What cosmic truths about life, death, and creation have been truly lost to time? This idea of fragmented, powerful knowledge leads directly to a very practical mystery found in the papyri themselves. Perhaps the most famous image from the entire Book of the Dead is not a god or a spell, but a single, terrifying scale. This is the weighing of the heart ceremony, and it represents the ultimate moment of truth for the deceased. The scene is meticulously detailed. The heart, believed to be the seat of a person's mind, memory, and conscience, is placed on one side of a great golden scale. On the other side rests the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. The jackal-headed god Anubis, master of embalming, carefully adjusts the balance. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe god, stands ready to record the result, and lurking beneath the scale waits Ammit, the devourer, a monstrous hybrid with the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. This was not a passive monster. It was a living, breathing manifestation of annihilation. The mystery here is not the ritual itself, but what the ancient Egyptians truly believed was happening. Was this a literal, physical event they thought their soul would experience, or was it a profound psychological and moral allegory, a story designed to enforce ethical behavior in life? The evidence suggests it was likely both, operating on multiple levels of belief simultaneously. For the average person, the terror was visceral and absolute. Your eternal fate hinged on the weight of your own heart. If your heart, heavy with lies, greed, or wrongdoing, sank the scale against the feather's perfect lightness, the verdict was immediate. Ammit would devour your heart, condemning you to a second death, a complete and irreversible end. There was no hell of punishment, just absolute non-existence. This psychological pressure was immense. It made morality a matter of cosmic survival. But look deeper, and the allegory becomes stunningly sophisticated. The heart was not weighed against a list of commandments, but against a feather, the ultimate symbol of lightness, truth, and harmony. The message is profound. A good life is not necessarily about following 1,000 rules. It is about living in alignment with the fundamental order of the universe, with a heart that is light, free from the burdens of guilt and corruption. The monster Ammit, then, becomes more than a threat. She is the inevitable consequence of a life out of balance. She is the embodiment of the self-destruction that comes from living a lie. This ritual brilliantly fused a simple, terrifying story with a complex philosophical idea. It provided a clear, memorable image for the illiterate, while offering layers of meaning for the educated elite. Every Egyptian who commissioned a Book of the Dead was, in effect, purchasing a guide to pass this exact test. Spells were included to prevent the heart from speaking against its owner, to ensure it would be found righteous. They were trying to tip the scales before they were even weighed. But what if your heart was pure and the scales balanced? You were declared true of voice and presented to Osiris, the green-skinned god of the underworld, for your eternal reward. Yet even here, in the presence of the Lord of the Dead, another bizarre and cryptic mystery awaited. Osiris, the Lord of the Dead, was a king who had been murdered and resurrected, a god who understood the journey. But to stand before him, the deceased needed more than a righteous heart. They needed a specific kind of power, the kind that came from knowing a secret that could command the cosmos itself. This brings us to one of the most potent concepts in Egyptian magic, the power of a true name. In their worldview, a name was not just a label. It was the very essence of a thing, its core identity, and its hidden source of power. To know the true name of a god, a demon, or even a doorway was to have absolute control over it. This belief is the key to our fourth mystery, centered on a single, audacious claim found in spell 17 of the Book of the Dead. In this spell, the deceased does not merely ask for mercy or recite virtues. Instead, they stand before the gods and declare, "I know you. I know your names." And most stunningly, I know the secret, hidden name of Ra, the supreme sun god. This was the ultimate cosmic insider knowledge. Ra's visible name was known to all, but his true hidden name was the vibrational key that started creation, the first sound spoken at the dawn of time. By claiming to know it, the deceased was not showing off. They were performing a crucial magical maneuver. They were aligning their own essence with the fundamental creative force of the universe, asserting that they were not a subject pleading before the gods, but an entity of equal, primordial power. They were, in effect, reminding Ra and Osiris of their own divine origins. The profound mystery here is that this ultimate name is never, ever written down in any text we have ever found. Not in the grandest temple, not on the most secret papyrus. The scribes would write phrases like, the great name, or the mysterious name of Ra, but the actual sequence of sounds was always omitted. This was deliberate. Writing it down would have been to release that power into the world indiscriminately, to make the most potent force in existence as common as a grocery list. It had to remain in the realm of the unspeakable, passed only through the most sacred initiation, or perhaps known only by the gods themselves. Some scholars speculate the name was considered so powerful that to utter it incorrectly could unmake reality, or that it was a sound impossible for the human voice to reproduce. Others suggest it was not a word at all, but a concept, like the singularity before the Big Bang, something that could not be contained by language. So when the deceased in spell 17 claims to know it, we are left wondering. Is this a magical bluff, a ritual formula to gain passage, or does it hint at a deeper, lost teaching that in the moment of judgment, the purified soul remembers its own divine source code, the original name from which it was spoken? The name remains the ultimate unspeakable truth, a blank space in the text that echoes louder than any written word. And this focus on hidden knowledge and identity leads directly to another, even more personal mystery found in the very first spell of the collection. Even the layout of a spell scroll held a hidden layer of meaning. As the deceased spirit moved through the underworld, it was guided by more than just words. The papyrus was also a map, illustrated with small painted scenes known as vignettes. These were not simple decorations. In many of these images, particularly those showing the critical moments of judgment or transformation, the gods are drawn in a profoundly strange way. They stand facing forward, but their heads are twisted completely backward on their shoulders, looking behind them. At first glance, it seems like a simple artistic error, a quirk of an ancient style. But in the meticulous, symbolic world of Egyptian religious art, nothing is accidental. This backward glance is a deliberate cryptographic puzzle, a visual code embedded within the guidebook itself. To understand it, we must step into their magical worldview. The Egyptians believed that images and words held innate power. To depict something was to make it real in the spiritual realm. So when a god in a funerary papyrus turns its head backward, it is breaking the natural law of the image, signaling that we are not looking at an ordinary scene. This god is operating outside of normal time and space. One compelling interpretation is that the god is not just observing the deceased, but is actively reciting a spell backward. In magic, speaking words in reverse was thought to amplify their power, to tap into a primordial, chaotic energy before it was shaped into the ordered world. The backward-headed god is thus visualized as the source of that potent, reversed incantation, charging the entire scene with transformative magic. Another interpretation is even more mind-bending. The backward glance might indicate that the god exists simultaneously in two realities. It looks back toward the world of the living, or the earlier steps of the underworld journey, while its body faces forward toward the outcome, the judgment hall of Osiris or the field of reeds. It is a single image capturing a non-linear moment, a divine being who perceives the entire journey at once, past, present, and future folded into a single glance. For the deceased, this was not just a symbol to admire. It was a functional component of the spell. By including this cryptic image on the papyrus placed in their tomb, they were incorporating that god's multidimensional power into their own journey. The vignette acted as a permanent ritual, a frozen moment of divine intervention that would activate when needed. The god's impossible posture was a guarantee that the normal rules did not apply here, that magic was in effect, and that the path through the underworld was being overseen by a consciousness that could see every danger and every turn, even the ones behind you. This visual code reminds us that the Book of the Dead was a multi-sensory tool, where the arrangement of ink and pigment was as crucial as the words they formed. And if the gods themselves could bend the rules of reality within the papyrus, it makes sense that the deceased would need their own set of supernatural tools for the journey ahead. The cryptic maps of the afterlife did not begin with the papyrus scroll. They were first carved into the very wood of the coffin itself, centuries earlier, in a collection known as the Coffin Texts. Among these spells, one stands out as a labyrinth of ink and intention, a section so bizarre it has been dubbed the Book of Two Ways. Think of it as the ancient world's most perilous road atlas, but the destination is eternity, and the roads are guarded by flames and fiends. Its central image is a stark, mesmerizing choice. Two zigzagging, parallel paths cut through a landscape of chaos. One is a black, winding waterway, a river of darkness. The other is a red, meandering land route, a road of fire. They snake around lakes of flame, avoid fortified gates, and navigate past monstrous guardians whose sole purpose is to annihilate the unprepared soul. This is not a simple fork in the road. It is a full topological diagram of terror. The profound mystery of the Book of Two Ways lies in its fundamental purpose. What were the ancient Egyptians actually looking at? Was this a literal, step-by-step cartographic guide, a spiritual GPS for the deceased to memorize? If so, the implications are staggering. It suggests they believed the afterlife had a concrete, mappable geography, a supernatural terrain as real as the Nile Valley, complete with its own deadly landmarks. A soul would need to know whether to board the boat of the sun god for the water route, or to recite the exact spell to pacify the demon at the third fiery lake on the land path. One wrong turn meant oblivion, but many scholars argue this was never meant to be a literal map. Instead, it could be a dense symbolic representation of the soul's internal struggle. The two paths might represent dual aspects of existence, order and chaos, life and death, the conscious and the subconscious mind. Navigating between them was not a physical journey, but a psychological ordeal, a process of integrating opposites to achieve wholeness before facing Osiris. The fiery lakes were not places but states of purifying trial. The demons were not external monsters, but one's own fears and moral failings. There is a third, even more intriguing possibility. The Book of Two Ways may have been an initiatory diagram, a visual teaching tool for priests or high-status individuals undergoing secret rites while still alive. The complex paths, with their gates and guardians, correlate strikingly with descriptions of mystical ascension in later traditions. Learning to navigate this symbolic landscape in one's mind could have been a form of spiritual training, a rehearsal for the actual post-mortem journey. The soul would not be seeing this map for the first time at death. It would be remembering a terrain it had already mastered in meditation. This transforms the coffin from a mere container for a body into a training manual for a consciousness preparing for the ultimate test. The debate remains unresolved, and that is the essence of its power. The Book of Two Ways forces us to ask a profound question about how the ancients perceived reality itself. Did they draw a firm line between the physical world and the spiritual one, or did they see them as deeply interwoven, where a map could be both a practical guide and a philosophical treatise, both a warning and a promise? This early blueprint of the beyond set the stage for every funerary text that followed, embedding a central, haunting idea into Egyptian belief. The journey to eternity was not a passive drift. It was an active, perilous navigation, and you needed the right chart to survive. The terrifying possibility of a second death was not just a threat from Ammit the Devourer. It was a specific, named peril that required its own dedicated countermeasure. Deep within the papyrus scrolls, we find Spell 44, a direct and urgent incantation titled, "For Not Dying a Second Time in the Realm of the Dead." This is more than a simple plea for immortality. It is a philosophical puzzle carved into a ritual formula, forcing us to ask what annihilation truly meant to the ancient Egyptian mind. The first death was the physical end, the moment the heart stopped beating. This was a transition, a door. the second death was something else entirely. It was the failure of the spiritual journey, the final and irreversible end of the soul's existence. But what form did that end take? The texts are deliberately vague, which is the heart of the mystery. One interpretation is pure oblivion, a cessation of consciousness so complete it is the void. Your identity, your memories, your essence all dissolved into the primordial waters of chaos from which creation first emerged. You simply stop being, yet other clues suggest something more active and dreadful. Some spells describe the damned being beheaded, burned in pits of fire, or turned upside down, unable to eat or drink. This sounds less like quiet oblivion and more like an eternal state of torment and deprivation, a punishment for a life lived against Ma'at, the cosmic order. So which was it? The genius of Egyptian theology is that it likely encompassed both ideas, operating on different levels. For the common person, the second death was probably envisioned as a series of horrific punishments, a concrete fate to fear. For the priestly elite, it may have been understood as a metaphysical unraveling, the ultimate disorder. Spell 44, then, becomes a magical shield against both possibilities. By reciting it, the deceased was not just asking for mercy. They were asserting their knowledge of the true nature of death itself, claiming the power to navigate between its two faces. The spell often declares, "I am one who is equipped, who has power over his two deaths." This is a staggering claim of spiritual mastery. It suggests that the prepared soul understood death as a dual process, and by knowing the correct words, they could control the outcome, transforming the second death from a threat into a mere step, a final shedding of mortal limitation before achieving a perfected, eternal state. This reveals a breathtakingly complex view of the afterlife. It was not a simple binary of heaven or hell. It was a multi-stage journey with multiple failure points, where eternal bliss in the field of reeds was not a given, but a hard-won achievement requiring knowledge, morality, and magical preparation. The fear of the second death was the engine that drove the entire funerary industry, from mummification to the writing of these very spells. It was the shadow that gave the light of eternity its meaning. The threat of a second death made every ritual a matter of survival, and none was more vital than the moment of awakening. Before a mummy or a statue could hope to recite spells or eat the offerings left for it, it needed one essential thing. It needed to be brought back to life, to have its senses restored. This was the purpose of the opening of the mouth ceremony, a powerful and mysterious rite that turned an inert object into a living vessel for the soul. Imagine a priest, not a mortician, standing before the wrapped body of the deceased. In his hands, he holds not surgical tools, but ritual instruments, a carved adze, a chisel, a forked blade. With precise ceremonial gestures, he would touch these instruments to the mummy's mouth, eyes, ears, and nose. He was not cutting the bandages. He was performing an act of profound magical surgery. Each touch was believed to reopen the senses that death had closed, allowing the ba, or soul, to see, hear, smell, and most importantly, speak and eat once more. Without this ritual, all the spells in the Book of the Dead were useless, because the deceased would have no mouth to speak them. The mystery lies in the sheer potency of this symbolism. Why would touching a stone chisel to a statue's lips grant it the breath of life? The answer is found in a foundational myth. The ritual reenacted the moment when the god Horus, the rightful son, used a magical iron adze to open the mouth of his father, Osiris, after Osiris had been murdered and resurrected. By performing the same actions, the priests were not just mimicking a story. They were tapping into that original, divine act of resurrection, channeling its power directly into the deceased. They were making the person a participant in the same myth that guaranteed eternal life to a god. This transformed the ceremony from a simple procedure into a cosmic event. The tools themselves were sacred. The adze represented the constellation Ursa Major, linking the ritual to the eternal, unchanging stars. The chisel was made of a meteoritic iron called the metal of heaven, a literal piece of the cosmos brought down to earth. Every element was designed to bridge the gap between the mundane world and the divine realm. For the ancient Egyptians, this was not metaphor. It was functional magic. By restoring the senses, the ritual created a functional interface between the spirit of the deceased and the physical world of the tomb. The mummy or statue became a point of contact, a receiver. Now, the soul could smell the incense, hear the prayers of the living, see the light from the burial shaft, and consume the spiritual essence of the bread, beer, and meat left in the offering chapel. It was the final, crucial step of rebirth, turning the tomb from a silent crypt into an active house for an eternal being. The opening of the mouth reminds us that for them, resurrection was not a vague hope. It was a technical process, achieved through correct ritual, correct tools, and the correct words, a process that began with the simple, miraculous act of opening a mouth that could then speak its own destiny. But to truly speak with the voice of a god, you had to understand the deepest secret of the divine world itself. At the very theological heart of the Book of the Dead lies a profound and beautiful contradiction, a mystery of two gods in one. On one hand, there is Ra, the radiant sun god who sails his bark across the sky each day, the lord of light, life, and cyclical renewal. On the other, there is Osiris, the green-skinned god of the dead, ruler of the silent, fertile underworld, who represents resurrection after murder, stillness, and regenerative decay. These are not just different gods, they represent two completely different visions of eternity. One is a dynamic, eternal journey across the sky. The other is a static, glorious kingship in a blessed field of reeds. Yet in the spells, the deceased does not choose between them. They pursue both simultaneously. This is the mystery of the solar Osirian unity. How did these two powerful, seemingly opposite doctrines become harmonized into a single path for the soul? The key is in the transformation the deceased undergoes. In spell after spell, the individual is referred to as the Osiris, followed by their name. For example, the Osiris Nebseni. This is not a title of honor. It is a statement of magical identity. By ritually becoming Osiris, the deceased aligns themselves with the archetype of the god who was murdered, reassembled, and resurrected. This grants them the right to stand in his hall, to be judged by him, and to inherit his promise of eternal, fertile life in the underworld realm. It is the path of becoming a perfected, justified being. But at the very same time, other spells are fervently focused on joining the crew of Ra's magnificent solar bark. The deceased pleads to be allowed aboard this celestial ship, to help defend it against the serpent of chaos, Apophis, as it travels through the 12 hours of the terrifying night. This is not a quiet rest in a field. This is an active, heroic, and perilous participation in the daily rebirth of the sun itself. So which is it? Is the soul a static king or a cosmic sailor? The breathtaking theological innovation of the Egyptian priests was to answer, yes. They envisioned the perfected soul as achieving a dual existence. By day, as the sun shone over the world of the living, the soul of the justified dead could enjoy the blissful, agricultural paradise of the field of reeds, the domain of Osiris. But when the sun set and began its dangerous journey through the underworld, that same soul could transform, rising up to join Ra's crew, contributing its power to the eternal fight against chaos and ensuring the sun would rise again. In this view, the underworld was not a separate place from the sun's nightly path. It was the same realm. Osiris was the still, fertile ground through which the solar bark sailed. The deceased became both the fertile earth that receives the sun's life-giving power and the active force that helps propel that sun back into the sky. This fusion solved a fundamental human yearning. It offered the peace and stability of a forever home, while also providing purpose and activity, an eternal role in the maintenance of the cosmos itself. You did not just get to live forever. You got a job, a vital one, defending all of creation from entropy every single night. The mystery we are left with is how this complex idea was first conceived. Was it a political compromise between competing priestly cults, one devoted to Ra and another to Osiris? Or was it a genuine mystical insight, a recognition that the cycle of life, death, and rebirth required both the stillness of the seed in the earth and the dynamic journey of the sun across the sky? The Book of the Dead does not explain the merger. It simply presents it as the ultimate spiritual reality. To achieve the highest state of eternity, you had to become both. This dual existence as both Earth and Sun required passing through a series of terrifying checkpoints. The underworld was not an open field, but a fortress, its perimeter guarded by a hierarchy of pure nightmare. The texts describe 7 massive gates, each with 3 sealed portals, making 21 individual barriers the soul must cross, and before each one stands a unique, monstrous guardian. Their names are not titles, but declarations of intent. There is Blood Drinker, who comes from the slaughterhouse. There is Fire-Eyed. There is one who eats the excrement of his hindquarters. These are not vague demons. They are meticulously described horrors, each with a specific, grotesque form and a specific, violent function. The mystery of these gatekeepers is not their appearance, but their fundamental purpose in the architecture of the afterlife. Were they literal, physical entities the Egyptians believed they would actually meet? If so, the journey was an obstacle course of surreal and brutal combat, where knowing each demon's secret name was the only weapon. Spell after spell provides these exact names, along with the correct dialogue to recite. The deceased must announce, "I know you, I know your name," and then proclaim a counter name that neutralizes the threat. Pass, for you are known, the spell concludes. This transforms the confrontation from a battle of strength into a battle of knowledge. It suggests the demons are less like independent monsters and more like automated security systems, programmed to annihilate the ignorant, but to stand aside for anyone who possesses the divine password. But another layer of interpretation paints a more psychological picture. What if each guardian represents not an external monster, but an internal flaw or fear the soul must conquer? The demon who devours shadows could be the fear of oblivion. Blood Drinker might symbolize violent rage or guilt. The one who consumes filth could represent self-loathing or shame. In this view, the gates are not physical doors but stages of purification. To pass through, you must honestly confront and name these darkest parts of yourself, disarming them with self-awareness and truth. The recitation of the spell becomes an act of profound internal confession and integration. You are not fighting a monster out there. You are reconciling the monster within. A third possibility merges both ideas into a stunningly sophisticated system. The demons could be both real and symbolic, operating on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. In the magical worldview of the Egyptians, a thought, a sin, or a fear could manifest as a tangible spiritual entity. Your inner corruption could literally take the form of Blood Drinker waiting for you at the gate. Therefore, the moral work of living a good life, of keeping your heart light, was also the practical work of disarming the future guardians of your path. Your lifelong actions literally shape the monsters you would meet after death. This makes the funerary spells a form of preemptive exorcism. By writing down and speaking the names of these demons, the deceased was not just memorizing a code. They were practicing the final, crucial act of self-mastery, rehearsing the moment they would look their own worst nature in its fire-eyed face and declare, "I know you." You have no power here. The gates, then, become the ultimate filter. They ensure that only those who have achieved both external knowledge and internal integrity can proceed to the unity of Osiris and Ra. The guardians are the rigorous examiners of the soul, and their terrifying visages are the first, most brutal test of whether you are truly ready for eternity. Even after passing the gates, eternal bliss required hard labor. The field of reeds was a paradise, but it was a working farm, where crops needed tending and canals needed dredging. This is where the small, mummy-formed statues known as Shabdis enter the story, and with them, one of the most debated spells in the entire collection. Spell 6 is the key. It is a short, direct command meant to be inscribed on the Shabdi itself. It begins with a startling instruction, "O Shabdi, allotted to me. If I am called upon, if I am detailed to do any work that is to be done in the realm of the dead, you shall detail yourself for me on every occasion." The spell then lists the unpleasant tasks, like cultivating the fields, irrigating the banks, and carrying sand from east to west. It ends with the potent phrase, "Here I am, you shall say." This was not a hope or a prayer. It was a legally binding magical contract, spoken in the first person by the statue, ensuring it would answer the call of the gods and perform the labor in the deceased's stead. On its surface, this seems like a charming and practical solution. Who wouldn't want a magical servant to do the chores of eternity? But look closer, and a profound mystery emerges. What does this belief actually reveal about the Egyptian vision of the perfect afterlife? One interpretation paints a picture of a deeply ingrained social hierarchy extending beyond death. The elite who could afford these statues, sometimes hundreds placed in a single tomb, were essentially ensuring their aristocratic status would continue. They would not work in paradise any more than they did on their earthly estates. The Shabdi system suggests the afterlife mirrored the rigid, labor-dependent structure of ancient Egyptian society itself, complete with a servant class. The controversy deepens when we consider the terminology. The word Shabdi likely derives from the Egyptian word for stick or wood, referring to the material, but it sounds eerily close to the word for answerer. Yet in Spell 6, the statue is not a volunteer. It is detailed, a term with military and bureaucratic connotations. It is assigned. Some scholars argue this reflects a belief in a compulsory, almost tax-like corvée labor system imposed by the gods. Even in death, you owed work days to the divine kingdom, and the Shabdi was your substitute. This transforms the statue from a helpful companion into a metaphysical loophole, a way to avoid divine mandatory service. There is, however, a more mystical and less cynical reading. Perhaps the Shabdi was not an external slave, but a magical extension of the deceased's own will and energy. In this view, creating and enchanting the Shabdi was an act of profound spiritual preparation. You were not outsourcing your labor, you were proactively dividing your own essence, creating a dedicated aspect of your being whose sole purpose was to handle mundane tasks, thereby freeing your core consciousness for higher pursuits like joining Ra's solar bark or communing with Osiris. The Shabdi was a tool for focus, allowing the soul to multitask in eternity. The truth likely resides in a blend of both ideas. The ancient Egyptians saw no contradiction between a magical worldview and a practical, bureaucratic one. The Shabdi spell provided comfort on multiple levels. It addressed a very real anxiety about posthumous toil. It reinforced social status, and it functioned as a potent piece of ritual technology. The mystery for us is deciding which layer we emphasize. Does Spell 6 reveal a civilization so accustomed to stratified labor that they could not imagine a paradise without it? Or does it show a remarkably creative and pragmatic approach to problem solving, even for problems of the soul? The little statue with its folded arms holds both possibilities. A silent worker carrying the weight of our interpretation as surely as it was meant to carry sand from east to west. The Shabdi stood ready to answer the call to work, but another, far grander duty awaited the soul in the deepest hours of darkness. Beyond the gates and the judgment hall, the most ambitious spells in the Book of the Dead do not describe a static paradise. They chart a perilous, star-studded voyage, a nightly journey of the sun god through the 12 regions of the underworld. This section, sometimes called the Book of the Night, is where funerary magic transforms into a precise and hidden cosmic science. Here, the papyrus becomes an astrological map, and the mystery is not just about survival, but about navigating the very machinery of the universe. The scene is breathtakingly complex. The sky goddess Nut, her body arched over the world, is depicted swallowing the sun at dusk. For the next 12 hours, Ra's solar bark travels along her star-studded underside, through a sequence of cavernous, populated realms. Each hour is a separate region with its own name, its own landscape of fire and water, and its own roster of gods and demons who either aid the sun or seek to stop it. This is the ultimate test, but look closer at these elaborate vignettes. Scattered around the body of Nut and along the bark's path are precise clusters of stars and small, standing figures. These are the decans, 36 star groups that rose consecutively on the horizon throughout the Egyptian year. Each decan was personified as a god, a star deity with its own name and function. Their sequence marked the passage of time, the hours of the night, and the progression of the seasons. This was not merely decorative mythology. It was a sophisticated integration of observable astronomy into the core of their religious belief. The mystery lies in the sheer precision of this encoding. The Egyptians were meticulous astronomers. They used the heliacal rising of certain stars, like Sirius, to predict the annual Nile flood. the event that guaranteed their civilization's survival. By mapping these same celestial markers onto the sun's underworld journey, they were performing a profound act of symbolic fusion. They connected the microcosm, the individual soul's journey through the tomb, directly to the macrocosm, the sun's eternal, predictable journey through the stars. For the deceased, this meant their personal resurrection was now synchronized with the greatest cosmic cycle there was. To recite a spell for the 5th hour of the night was to align your spirit's progress with a specific stellar configuration and a specific phase of the sun's regenerative struggle. You weren't just praying for help, you were inserting yourself into a celestial timetable. The terrifying serpent Apophis, who attacked the bark each night, represented not just chaos, but the inevitable entropy that the ordered cosmos, guided by stars and spells, had to overcome daily. This embedded knowledge transforms how we see the entire Book of the Dead. It was, in part, a technical manual for astral navigation. The star charts and decan gods provided a spiritual constellation map. By knowing which decan ruled which hour, the soul could orient itself in the timeless dark of the underworld, using the same stars a living priest might use to tell time on Earth. The tomb's ceiling, often painted with stars, was not just a pretty night sky. It was a functional replica, a simulator ensuring the deceased would recognize the heavens from their unique, subterranean vantage point. This reveals a mindset where science and spirituality were a single, unified field of knowledge. Observing the predictable rhythm of the stars proved the universe was ordered, which proved Maat was real, which proved that magic and morality could triumph over chaos. The Book of the Night is the ultimate expression of that faith. It tells us the ancient Egyptians looked up at the stars and did not see random points of light. They saw the illuminated map of the afterlife, a divine clockwork, and they wrote the instructions for joining its eternal motion right into the papyrus placed over a dead person's heart. This celestial map of stars and peril also included one of the underworld's most terrifying landmarks. Among the dark waters and winding paths, the texts repeatedly warned of a great and blazing lake of fire. This was no mere metaphor. The soul might need to know a specific spell to cool its waters, or to be provided with a magical ferryman to cross it safely. To fail meant incineration, a second death more vivid than any other. But the origin of this fiery lake presents a fascinating puzzle that stretches beyond the Nile Valley. Is this a uniquely Egyptian vision, or does it reveal a shared human archetype that echoes across millennia? The concept appears early and consistently in their funerary literature. In the coffin texts, the lake is a deadly hazard on the two ways. In the Book of the Dead, it is a place of punishment for the enemies of Ra and Osiris, and a potential purgatory for the unjustified soul. Its flames were believed to both destroy and purify, consuming corruption while testing the resolve of the worthy. This dual nature is the first clue to its power. Fire transforms, it reduces wood to ash, but it also hardens clay into pottery and refines metal. The Egyptians, masterful metallurgists and potters, understood this intimately. The lake of fire, therefore, could symbolize the ultimate transformative ordeal, the trial by which the soul's impurities were burned away, leaving only a perfected, eternal essence behind. Yet when we look at later religious traditions, the parallels are startling. Zoroastrianism, which influenced many later faiths, speaks of a river of molten metal, through which all must pass at the final judgment. In the Hebrew Bible, the visions of Daniel describe a river of fire issuing from the divine throne. Christian and Islamic eschatology both feature hellfire as a central element of divine punishment. Even in Buddhist cosmology, there are hot hells among the various realms of suffering. The mystery is not the similarity itself, but the possible connection. Could the Egyptian lake of fire be an early, influential source for this widespread symbol? There is no evidence of direct borrowing, as these cultures developed their ideas largely independently. This leads to a more profound possibility. The symbol of purifying or punishing fire may be a universal archetype, emerging independently in different civilizations because it mirrors a fundamental human experience. Fire is one of humanity's oldest tools and oldest fears. It provides warmth, cooks food, and clears land, but it also brings uncontrollable destruction and agonizing pain. It is the element that most visibly represents the boundary between life and death, between utility and terror. It makes perfect sense that early humans, pondering the ultimate fate of the soul, would instinctively reach for this most potent and dualistic of symbols. The mind, trying to conceive of a spiritual reckoning, naturally conceptualizes it as a trial by humanity's most powerful elemental force. The Egyptian formulation is particularly sophisticated because it often retains that sense of potential purification, not just punishment. Their lake is not solely a destination for the wicked, it is an obstacle on the path for everyone, a dangerous terrain that requires knowledge to navigate. This suggests they saw the afterlife journey itself as an alchemical process, with fire as the essential agent of change. The soul was not just judged, it was refined. So, while we may never trace a direct historical line from the papyrus scrolls to later scriptures, the Lake of Fire stands as a powerful testament to a shared human intuition. Across deserts and centuries, different cultures looked into the flames of their hearths and their sacrifices, and saw in the flickering light a glimpse of the ultimate truth. They understood that to reach any form of eternity, one must first pass through the fire. The fire's ultimate purpose was not destruction, but transformation, a concept physically embodied by a small, powerful object placed directly over the silent heart. This is the magic of the heart scarab, a polished stone amulet that may be the most ingenious fusion of biology, theology, and practical magic in the entire Egyptian funerary kit. Carved from green jasper, black basalt, or even faience, this amulet was not merely decorative. It was a functional device, inscribed on its flat underside with the critical words of spell 30b, and positioned over the mummy's heart during the wrapping process. Its purpose was explicitly stated, to prevent my heart from opposing me in the realm of the dead. Think of the heart not just as an organ, but as an independent witness with a voice and a memory of every deed, good and bad. During the weighing ceremony, there was a terrifying possibility that your own heart, overwhelmed by fear or burdened by guilt, might speak out against you, tipping the scales toward Amit. The scarab, through its spell, acted as a magical silencer or a persuasive advocate, compelling the heart to remain silent or to only speak of your virtues. It was a form of spiritual insurance for the moment of truth, but the scarab's power runs far deeper than this courtroom tactic. Its very form unlocks a second, more beautiful mystery tied to the beetle itself. The Egyptians observed the common dung beetle, or Scarabaeus sacer, rolling a ball of dung across the ground. They saw this ball as a miniature sun being pushed across the sky. More astonishingly, they noticed that the beetle would bury this ball, and from it, new life would seemingly emerge spontaneously. They did not understand the full life cycle, so to them, the beetle was a creature that created life from waste, that pushed the sun, and that was reborn from its own buried artifact. The scarab thus became the ultimate symbol of spontaneous generation, eternal renewal, and resurrection. By placing a scarab over the heart, the priests were performing a profound act of sympathetic magic. They were transforming the human heart into a seed, a core of potential life. Just as the beetle's ball contained the promise of new beetles, the heart scarab amulet promised that from the stillness of death, a new, perfected form of life would emerge. The green stone often used mirrored the skin of Osiris, god of resurrection, and the fertile black soil of the Nile. So this single amulet performed a dual function that is breathtaking in its elegance. On one level, it was a legal defender for the psychological self, guarding against internal betrayal at the final judgment. On a deeper, metaphorical level, it was a biological blueprint for rebirth, physically linking the organ of conscience and identity to the most powerful natural symbol of regeneration they knew. It ensured the heart would not just be silent, but would be fertile, ready to sprout into new existence. The scarab tells us the Egyptians saw no divide between the moral and the biological journeys of the soul. To be justified before the gods was the same state of being as being ready to germinate in the underworld. The amulet was a battery charging the heart with both righteousness and life force, a stone seed waiting for the moment it would crack open and allow the true self to take flight. The scarab ensured the heart's loyalty, But the voice itself had a separate, critical test to pass. Before the scales could even be balanced, the deceased had to stand in the hall of judgment and speak a series of denials directly to 42 divine assessors. This is spell 125, the so-called negative confession, and its list of sins provides a raw, unfiltered X-ray of the ancient Egyptian conscience. On the surface, it seems straightforward, a checklist of crimes to deny. I have not committed robbery, I have not killed, I have not told lies, but as we move down the list, the declarations become startlingly specific, and that is where the true mystery lies. Why would a universal moral code include such oddly precise prohibitions? For instance, one denial states, I have not stolen the cakes left for the gods. Another says, I have not stolen milk from the mouths of children. I have not copulated with a boy. I have not been deaf to words of truth. Each of these is a window into a specific anxiety, a particular crack in the social order that the Egyptians feared could damn a soul. The mention of temple offerings, like the cakes, points directly to a profound societal taboo, the violation of sacred property. In an economy where the temple was not just a church, but a vast administrative and storage center, pilfering from the god's share was not simple theft. It was treason against the divine king and a direct attack on the cosmic balance maintained by the priesthood. To deny this sin was to affirm one's role in upholding the entire economic and theological structure of the state. The sin of stealing milk from children is even more poignant. In a culture dependent on agriculture and vulnerable to famine, this was a crime against the future itself. It represented not just greed, but a willingness to starve the next generation for immediate gain, a complete betrayal of communal responsibility. The confession here moves from public order to intimate, village-level morality. Then there is the denial of pederasty, a declaration that has sparked intense debate. Its inclusion suggests this was a recognized behavior considered deeply disruptive, likely because it violated strict social hierarchies and family structures. It was an abuse of power and a corruption of the expected path to adulthood, but the list is not solely about actions. It delves into attitudes. Declarations like, I have not been arrogant, I have not been angry without reason, and I have not been deaf to words of truth, reveal that the moral ideal extended far beyond deeds into the realm of character and perception. A righteous person was humble, controlled, and above all, open to truth and order, even when it was inconvenient. This transforms the confession from a legal plea into a portrait of an ideal citizen, one whose internal state is as ordered as the cosmos. So what is the mystery in these nuances? The puzzle is that this list was likely a standardized, ritual formula, not a personalized confession. Most people who owned a Book of the Dead would have had the same 42 denials written for them, regardless of their actual life. This creates a fascinating tension. The spells provide a detailed map of societal fears and ideals, but they may not reflect the individual's true moral reckoning. The power, then, may have been in the recitation itself. By speaking these words, by giving voice to the denial of every major social and spiritual transgression, the deceased was ritually purifying themselves. They were not necessarily claiming innocence of every specific act, but rather aligning their entire being with the principle behind each prohibition. To say, I have not stolen temple cakes, was to declare, my life was in harmony with the sacred economy. To say, I have not been deaf to truth, was to assert, I was ultimately aligned with Mad. The list was a tool for achieving, through magic and declaration, the state of purity required to face the scales. It was the final, verbal polishing of the soul before the weight of the heart was truly known. The promise of the field of reeds was a vision of home, perfected. This ultimate destination was described with the intimate detail of a farmer's deepest wish. It was a land of boundless, shimmering grain fields, taller than a man, eternally ripe for harvest. Cool, clear canals cut through the rich black earth, ready for easy irrigation. There were fruit-laden trees, gentle breezes, and peace that stretched to the horizon. In essence, it was Egypt itself, but without drought, without toil, without sickness or sorrow. You would live in your own house, reunite with your family, and enjoy the fruits of the earth forever. It sounds like a straightforward, agricultural paradise, a reward for a life well lived. But this beautiful description hides a profound theological puzzle. Did the ancient Egyptians believe this was a literal place, a geographic location in the cosmos where perfected souls went to farm for eternity? Or was the field of reeds a metaphor for a state of being, a spiritual condition of perfect harmony and fulfillment? The evidence pulls us in both directions. The meticulous descriptions of surveying land, reaping emmer wheat, and eating the sacred loaves of the gods feel incredibly concrete. Tomb paintings often show the deceased happily plowing or sailing in the marshes, just as they did in life. This suggests a powerful, literal belief in a continued existence that was comfortingly familiar. Yet, other texts describe the field of reeds in more abstract terms, calling it the field of offerings or the field of peace, and placing it in the mysterious east, near the horizon where the sun is reborn. It becomes less a plot of land and more a symbol of the soul's successful integration into the eternal cycle. This is where the mystery of duality returns with full force. We have already seen the soul's ambition to join the perilous, active solar journey with Ra. So which was the true goal, the quiet, static farming paradise of Osiris, or the dynamic, heroic voyage with the sun god? The answer, once again, is both. The Egyptian afterlife vision was not an either-or proposition. It was a brilliant synthesis of two profound human desires. The field of reeds satisfied the deep yearning for stability, rest, and the eternal return to a beloved homeland. It was the reward for passing judgment, the secure, blessed farmstead where your identity was preserved forever. The solar journey, however, answered a different need, the desire for purpose, glory, and participation in something greater than oneself. It was the path of transformation and cosmic duty. A perfected soul was believed capable of inhabiting both realities simultaneously. By day, you could enjoy the blissful, familiar abundance of the field. But when night fell and the sun entered the underworld, your spirit could rise to join Ra's crew, defending the bark from chaos. In this view, the field of reeds was not separate from the sun's path. It was the fertile ground over which the solar bark sailed. You were both the blessed land, receiving the sun's light, and the active sailor, helping to pull that light through the darkness. This resolves the apparent contradiction. The field was the state of achieved peace and justification, while the solar journey was the eternal activity that stayed enabled. You did not choose one path. You achieved the right to walk both. So, was it a literal place or a spiritual state? It was likely both. A concept flexible enough to offer concrete comfort to the common person while providing mystical depth for the initiated. The true mystery is how seamlessly they wove these two dreams together, creating an afterlife where you could finally rest, yet never cease to matter. The promise of a perfected farmstead in the field of reeds presents one vision of eternity, but the later royal tombs reveal a far darker and more chaotic blueprint. Deep within the stone corridors of the Valley of the Kings, on the walls meant to guide pharaohs into the afterlife, we find the terrifying and cryptic images of the Book of Caverns. This is not a gentle guide. It is a visceral descent into a subterranean nightmare, a stark departure from the orderly judgment halls and solar barks. The text divides the underworld into 6 vast, plunging caverns, each filled with surreal and brutal tableaus. Here, the gods themselves are shown in states of extreme dismemberment. Their bodies are fragmented, their heads severed, their forms contorted in darkness. In one haunting scene, the sun god Ra is depicted as a ram-headed being enclosed within the coiled body of a giant serpent, a symbol of the very chaos he fights. Other serpents breathe fire, and bound enemies of order sink into pits of liquid fire. The imagery is raw, punishing, and deliberately unsettling. The central mystery of the Book of Caverns lies in this extreme symbolism. Why would a funerary text designed to ensure resurrection wallow in such graphic depictions of dissolution and torment? One compelling interpretation is that this book reveals a hidden, necessary stage in the process of rebirth that earlier texts glossed over. Before the soul could be reassembled like Osiris, before it could stand justified in the Hall of Truth, it had to first be utterly taken apart. The caverns may represent the raw, primordial state of the underworld, the chaotic soup of potential that exists before order is imposed. The dismembered gods are not being punished. They are being dissolved into their essential components, their divine energy broken down so it can be purified and reconstituted in a more perfect form. The sun disk within the serpent is a powerful clue. The serpent, often a symbol of chaos and the enemy Apophis, here is not an adversary but a container. This suggests that even the Supreme Sun God must, during his nightly journey, enter and be processed by the very forces of chaos he opposes. He must be digested by the darkness to be reborn at dawn. For the deceased pharaoh, this meant his journey mirrored this terrifying but essential cycle. To be reborn, he too had to symbolically pass through these caverns, to have his old identity dissolved in the cosmic workshop before his eternal self could be forged anew. The Book of Caverns, then, may be the most brutally honest of the guides. It does not promise a smooth path. It reveals the frightening, messy, and chaotic mechanics of regeneration itself, the necessary deconstruction that precedes every dawn. It tells us that for the ancient Egyptians, true rebirth was not a gentle awakening, but a passage through a divine furnace. Even the terrifying dissolution within the caverns required a specific medium to manifest its power. The spells that could guide a soul through such trials were not merely ideas, they were physical objects, and this presents a profound contradiction. The vast majority of ancient Egyptians could not read the elegant hieroglyphs that filled their Book of the Dead. Yet, they invested significant wealth to have these scrolls created and placed in their tombs. If you could not read the words, what was the point of having them written down at all? The answer lies in a core tenet of Egyptian magic that elevates writing from simple communication to an act of creation. They believed in a force called Heka, the underlying power that shaped the cosmos, the energy that the gods used to speak the world into existence. In this worldview, the spoken word was the spark of Heka, but the written word was its permanent, tangible vessel. When a scribe carefully dipped his reed pen and formed the shape of a god's name, a ritual offering, or a command to a demon, he was not recording information. He was conducting Heka into the papyrus, weaving the spell's essence into the very fibers. The papyrus sheet transformed from plant material into a battery, a pre-charged magical device. The hieroglyphs themselves were not passive symbols. They were miniature portals, each one a functional component that activated in the presence of the deceased spirit. This is why the quality of the writing and the illustrations mattered so deeply. A beautifully drawn vignette of the weighing of the heart wasn't just for show. It was a more effective receiver for the magical event it depicted. The scroll placed in the tomb was therefore far more than a reference book. It was a permanent, active ritual in object form. It would function automatically for its owner, its silent symbols broadcasting their protective and guiding energies for eternity. But this creates a fascinating tension with another requirement. Many of the spells are explicitly written in the first person, as dialogue to be spoken by the deceased. "O you gods who are in the underworld," the text might say, "I know you, I know your names." If the scroll works magically on its own, why would the soul need to recite the lines aloud? This dual necessity reveals the sophisticated, multi-layered nature of their magic. Think of the written spell as the installed software, the program loaded onto the soul's journey. The spoken recitation was the execution command, the voice activation that launched the program at the precise moment it was needed. The voice of the deceased, empowered by the Heka stored in the written words, gave the magic direction and intent. It personalized the universal spell. Furthermore, the act of speaking was an assertion of identity and presence. A silent soul in the underworld was a lost soul. By declaring, "I am the Osiris," and reciting the spell, the deceased announced their active, conscious participation in the journey. They were not a passive passenger carried by the scroll's magic. They were a co-pilot, using the scroll's power to navigate. This synergy between the permanent written word and the performed spoken word ensured coverage for all possibilities. If the soul was disoriented or forgot what to say, the written spell in the tomb continued its silent work. If the scroll was damaged, the correctly memorized and spoken words could still carry power. It was a perfect, redundant system for the greatest journey one could ever take. The scribe who copied the text was not just a clerk, he was a magician, channeling divine language onto a sheet of papyrus. The illiterate owner who commissioned it was not purchasing a text they could read, but a spiritual machine, crafted to their specifications, that would hum with silent, eternal power from the moment it was placed beside them. This incredible variation between scrolls is itself a profound mystery. If you were to line up a dozen different books of the dead from the same century, you would not find two that are exactly alike. The spells might appear in a different order. Certain chapters could be missing entirely, while others are lavishly illustrated with unique vignettes. One papyrus might be 30 feet long, a masterpiece of calligraphy bursting with color. Another, for someone of more modest means, could be a simple, shortened version on a scrap of linen. This was not a standardized Bible, but a deeply personal and surprisingly flexible document. The question is, why? What forces shaped each unique copy? The first clue lies in the economics of eternity. Commissioning a Book of the Dead was a significant expense. You needed to hire a skilled scribe, purchase the precious papyrus, and often, an artist to paint the vignettes. The length and quality of your scroll directly reflected your family's budget. A wealthy noble could afford the complete set of nearly 200 spells, a comprehensive guide for every conceivable underworld challenge. A middle-class artisan might settle for a shorter, more affordable version containing only the essential spells for judgment and resurrection. This practical reality meant the book was, in part, a status symbol, a visible declaration of one's earthly success meant to carry over into the afterlife. But money alone does not explain the fascinating regional differences scholars have detected. In Thebes, the scrolls often favored certain sequences of spells and a distinct artistic style for the gods. In Memphis, the traditions of the local priesthood might emphasize different protective deities or underworld landscapes. This suggests the existence of local scriptoriums or priestly schools, each with their own established templates and theological emphases. A family would go to their local temple workshop, and the scribe would work from the master copy he was trained on, introducing subtle variations that became the local style. Yet, the most intriguing possibility is intentional customization. While many spells were formulaic, there was room for personalization. The owner's name was inserted into key passages, transforming generic text into a personal declaration. More compellingly, some spells seem to have been selected based on the individual's profession or fears. A scribe might include extra spells about preserving his writing skills. A sailor could emphasize incantations for safe passage on the dangerous waters of the underworld. A woman might have spells focused on protection in the realm of the dead. This tailoring hints that the scroll was not just purchased off a shelf. It was, at least to some degree, consulted upon, a collaborative project between the purchaser, or their family, and the priestly scribe who understood the magical necessities. This variation reveals the Book of the Dead as a living, breathing tradition. It was not frozen in stone. It evolved over centuries, adapted to local beliefs, personal circumstances, and the practicalities of production. Each papyrus was a snapshot of a specific moment, a specific person, and a specific community's interpretation of the journey to forever. The mystery of the differences tells us that for the ancient Egyptians, achieving eternity was not a one-size-fits-all process. It was a path you could, in some small way, help to map for yourself. Even the most cosmic journey could be threatened by a demon in the wash basin. Tucked among spells for navigating celestial rivers and facing gods, we find a curious and oddly specific incantation, a warning against a creature known as the demon of the wash basin. This was not a grand beast of the underworld gates, but a lurking terror associated with the simple, everyday act of washing one's hands. The spell instructs the deceased on how to repel it, declaring, "Begone, you who come in the darkness, who enters in stealth." Your poison is for yourself. The inclusion of such a domestic, almost petty threat in a guide to eternity is a profound puzzle. Why would a soul preparing to join the sun god or stand before Osiris need to worry about the water they use to clean themselves? The answer reveals a cornerstone of the Egyptian worldview, where no aspect of existence, no matter how small, was separate from the need for magical protection. Their universe was animated by Heka, the fundamental force of magic, and this force was present in all things, from the sweep of a star to the pour of a jug. Danger, therefore, could manifest at any scale. A cosmic serpent could attack the solar bark, and a malicious spirit could inhabit your household water. The afterlife was not a sanitized, purely spiritual realm. It was envisioned as a perfected continuation of life, complete with homes, meals, and daily routines. In this eternal home, you would still need to wash, to eat, to sleep. And if the world of the living required spells and amulets to ward off scorpions, illness, or bad luck, then the world of the dead required the same vigilance against spiritual pests. The demon of the wash basin represents all the minor, irritating, yet potentially deadly corruptions that could seep into a perfect eternity. It is a reminder that chaos, in their view, was not just the grand enemy Apophis. It was also the thousand small breakdowns of order: a contaminated meal, a polluted drink, a curse hiding in a mirror or a pool of water. To secure a blissful afterlife, you had to secure every part of it, down to the basin you used each morning. This spell transforms our understanding of the entire Book of the Dead. It was not only a passport for grand adventures in the divine realm, it was also a homeowner's manual for the hereafter, providing magical solutions for domestic spiritual upkeep. The mundane and the cosmic were woven from the same fabric, and a threat to your cleanliness was, in its own way, as dangerous to your eternal peace as a failure in the Hall of Judgment. It tells us that for the ancient Egyptians, a complete and successful eternity depended on guarding every portal, whether that portal was a gate of fire or the rim of a simple clay bowl. Among the spells for wash basins and celestial barks, one symbol stands immovable, a silent promise carved into tomb walls and painted on coffin lids. The Jed pillar, a simple yet powerful form resembling a tree trunk with crossbars, is far more than decoration. It is the hieroglyph for stability, endurance, and something far more profound, the very backbone of the god Osiris. Its mystery lies not in its shape, but in the staggering weight of meaning it was asked to carry. On the most immediate level, the Jed was the spine of Osiris, the god murdered and dismembered by his brother Set. In the myth, after Osiris was reassembled and resurrected, the Jed became the emblem of his triumph over fragmentation and chaos. It was his structural integrity restored, the literal and metaphorical support that allowed him to rise from death to become lord of the underworld. For the deceased, whose goal was to become the Osiris, the Jed symbol performed a direct act of sympathetic magic. Placing it near the mummy or inscribing it in the Book of the Dead was believed to transfer that same unshakable stability to the individual's own spiritual backbone, ensuring their own resurrection would be successful and complete. They were grafting the god's strength onto their own essence, but the symbol's power extends far beyond a single god's anatomy. The Jed was also envisioned as the axis of the world, the central pole around which the cosmos turned. In this role, it connected the earth to the heavens, providing a fixed point of order in the swirling potential of chaos. It was the mast of the solar bark, the post that held up the sky, the enduring principle that kept creation from collapsing back into nothingness. When a person aligned themselves with the Jed, they were not just seeking personal resurrection, they were anchoring their soul to the fundamental stability of the universe itself. This cosmic symbolism was made active through a powerful public ritual known as the raising of the Jed pillar. During key festivals, priests would use ropes to ceremonially raise a giant Jed pillar, an event met with jubilant celebration. This was not a simple reenactment of the Osiris myth. It was a collective act of cosmic maintenance. By raising the pillar, the community was participating in the annual renewal of the world, reinforcing the axis that kept their reality intact, and ensuring the fertility of the land for the coming year. It was a spell cast by an entire civilization. Within the personal context of the Book of the Dead, this ritual had a parallel. Specific spells were designed to raise the Jed within the deceased, to set their backbone upright in the underworld, which was the essential first step toward standing before Osiris and walking into eternity. The pillar's layered meaning, as divine spine, world axis, and personal stability fused into a single, potent concept. To possess the Jed was to have an unbreakable core, a connection to the eternal framework of existence, and the guaranteed promise of rising again. It answered a deep, human fear of dissolution with the simplest of images, a pillar that cannot fall. The Jed pillar promised an unshakable spine for eternity, but the soul's nightly voyage demanded far more than stability. It required navigating a sequence of ordeals so precise they were divided into 12 distinct watches, a detailed itinerary of terror and transformation known as the ritual of the hours of the night. This was not a vague journey through darkness, but a meticulously scheduled initiatory ordeal, where each hour presented a unique landscape, a specific demonic host, and a critical task for the soul joining the sun god's bark. The mystery lies in the chilling specificity of this roadmap. Why would the afterlife need such a rigid, hourly timetable, and what was truly being transformed within the soul as it ticked through this cosmic clock? The first hours are a descent into absolute silence and disorientation. As the sun bark slips below the horizon, it enters the realm of the first hour, a twilight domain where the voices of the living fade into a muffled echo. The soul must navigate this initial shock of separation, often guided by the god Sakar, a falcon deity of the necropolis, through a landscape of shimmering, uncertain sands. The challenge here is psychological, to accept the irreversible passage from the world of light and sound into the realm of shadows. By the third and fourth hours, the terrain shifts dramatically. The bark now sails on a river of utter darkness, a waterway that is less liquid and more a substance of pure potential. Here, the crew must appease serpentine guardians who are not outright enemies, but custodians of this formless state. These beings test the soul's knowledge, demanding the correct names and gestures to prove the traveler is not an intruder of chaos, but an expected participant in the cosmic cycle. Failure means being cast adrift in this featureless void, a fate worse than any monster's jaws. The ordeal intensifies at the midpoint of the night, in the dreaded sixth hour. This is the heart of the journey, the moment of deepest crisis and most profound mystery. The texts describe the solar bark entering the cavernous, silent corpse of the giant god Osiris himself. The sky goddess Nut and the earth god Jeb are shown bending over his immense, reclining form. Inside, the bark becomes a spark of light moving through the divine body. This is not a grotesque image, but a stunning allegory for the process of regeneration. The soul, traveling with the sun's essence, is now literally inside the source of resurrection. It is being digested by the very principle of death and rebirth, broken down and infused with Osiris' regenerative power. The challenge here is one of surrender and integration. The soul must not fight this dissolution, but must recite spells affirming unity with the god, declaring, "I am Osiris. I am the seed within the flesh of the god." It is the ultimate test of faith in the cycle, trusting that to be taken apart within the god's body is the necessary prelude to being remade. Emerging from the corpse of Osiris, the later hours focus on reassembly and defense. In the 8th and 9th hours, the waters begin to stir with life again, but now the serpent Apophis, the embodiment of pure chaos, launches its direct attack. The soul's role shifts from passenger to active defender. Spells from this section are cries of support for the sun god, shouts to bind the serpent with magical ropes, and incantations to stir the helpful gods who spear the monster. The soul is no longer just a supplicant, it is a combatant in the eternal war that guarantees dawn. This active participation is crucial, for it proves the soul's value to the cosmic crew, earning its place not through pleas, but through demonstrated power and will. Finally, in the 11th and 12th hours, the tone changes to one of frantic preparation and triumph. The bark approaches the eastern horizon. The corpse of Osiris is now far behind, and the soul, having been purified and tested, assists in the final rituals of renewal. It helps awaken other dormant gods. It chants spells to strengthen the aging sun god, now depicted as an elderly figure, and it prepares for the explosive moment of rebirth. As the first sliver of light cracks the horizon in the 12th hour, the soul is there, not as a bystander, but as a proven member of the team that made it happen. This hourly ritual transforms the soul's journey from a passive trip to an active initiation. Each specific challenge, from navigating void waters to battling inside a god's corpse, corresponds to a stage of inner alchemy. The disorientation of the early hours mirrors the soul's release from earthly identity. The surrender within Osiris parallels the death of the old self. The fight against Apophis represents the conquering of one's own inner chaos, and the final push toward dawn symbolizes the birth of a new, solar-powered eternal being. The mystery of this detailed timetable reveals an astonishing vision. The Egyptians saw the universe itself as a great initiatory temple, with the sun's journey as the master ritual. By inserting the soul into this precise schedule, the Book of the Dead was providing the ultimate curriculum. You weren't just going to the afterlife, you were enrolling in a 12-hour night school for gods, where passing each hourly exam meant transforming, piece by piece, from a mortal memory into an eternal force of light. The sun god's bark fought chaos with pure light, but some spells in the Book of the Dead seem to invoke a far darker power. Scattered among the incantations are unsettling, violent passages that have sparked a fierce and enduring debate among Egyptologists. One of the most chilling examples is the reference to the slaughtering block of the two ladies. The two ladies were the protective goddesses of Upper and Lower Egypt, Nekhbet the vulture and Wajet the cobra, symbols of royal power and unity. Their slaughtering block was not a place of protection, however. It was described as a site of execution. Other spells speak of beheading enemies, binding captives, and burning the damned in fiery pits. On the surface, these lines fit the overarching theme of the texts, the eternal struggle against the forces of Isfet, or disorder. The enemies being slain are not people, but the demonic followers of Apophis, the serpent of chaos, or the abstract manifestations of evil and falsehood. In this purely symbolic reading, the slaughtering block is a metaphysical tool, a divine instrument for cutting away spiritual corruption so that order, Mat, can be preserved. The violence is not literal, but a necessary allegory for the soul's purification, the brutal separation of the justified self from the chaotic dross of existence. For a soul preparing to be weighed, these spells could be a form of spiritual warfare, declaring one's active participation in the cosmic battle on the side of the gods. Yet, a shadow of doubt lingers. Could these graphic metaphors be preserving a much older, more visceral reality? This is the core of the controversy. Some scholars point to archaeology and the earliest periods of Egyptian history. In the pre-dynastic era and the First Dynasty, there is clear evidence of human sacrifice accompanying royal burials. Retainers, servants, and possibly prisoners were interred around the king's tomb. Their deaths meant to provide a court for the monarch in the next world. This practice was relatively short-lived, fading away as early as the Second Dynasty. The theory proposes that as Egyptian society and religion became more sophisticated, the physical act of ritual killing was sublimated, transformed over centuries into symbolic language within the funerary texts. The actual slaughter was replaced by a symbolic slaughter, performed with words on papyrus instead of blades on a block. The enemies were no longer human captives, but personifications of evil. The dark, potent energy of the old ritual was thus preserved and sanitized, its power harnessed but its physical horror left behind. In this view, the phrase slaughtering block of the two ladies is a cryptic fossil, a linguistic artifact from a time when the goddess's protection was enacted through very real and terminal means. The debate hinges on how we interpret the Egyptian mindset. Were they capable of maintaining such a stark dichotomy between a brutal past and a symbolic present? Proponents of the sublimation theory argue that religion constantly evolves, and the Book of the Dead is a palimpsest, a document written over older, erased layers of belief. The violent imagery, they suggest, retains its emotional and magical potency precisely because it echoes those deep, ancestral rites. Opponents counter that the Egyptians were masters of metaphor and had a rich vocabulary for describing cosmic conflict. They see no need to invoke a historical practice of human sacrifice to explain the texts, arguing that the vivid descriptions are simply the natural language of a world, you engaged in a perpetual, existential war against disorder. The two ladies' block, then, is no more a reference to actual killing than the lake of fire is a reference to a real geological feature. It is a powerful symbol of decisive, divine judgment. This mystery forces us to confront the boundaries between symbol and history, between the poetry of ritual and the potential archaeology of belief. It asks whether the most serene and orderly vision of the afterlife, the field of reeds, was built atop foundations that were once stained with a more primal understanding of power. The spells do not provide an answer, they only present the stark, unflinching image, leaving us to wonder if we are reading a metaphor born from philosophy, or an echo from a time when the gateway to eternity was guarded by more than just words. Beyond the violent imagery of cosmic battles lies a different kind of code, one of sequence and structure. The scrolls may differ wildly, but they are not random. Scholars have detected a subtle, underlying architecture in the Book of the Dead, a loose but deliberate narrative progression that guides the soul from one stage of the journey to the next. This is our next great mystery, the potential for a hidden mathematical or structural logic woven into the spells by the ancient priests. Could the varying sequences we see be different expressions of a single, sacred blueprint? The journey often begins, logically, with spells for the preservation of the body and the funeral rites. These are the practical necessities, the magical grounding in the tomb. Then, the sequence typically shifts to spells for awakening the senses and empowering the soul to move freely, the essential first steps of rebirth. Following this, we encounter the core existential trials, the incantations for navigating the underworld geography, passing the demonic gates, and crucially, the spells for the judgment hall and the negative confession. This is the central crisis of the journey. Finally, the later sections focus on the rewards and the new existence, spells for transforming into divine beings, joining the solar bark, and enjoying the bliss of the field of reeds. This basic arc, from death to judgment to eternal life, feels instinctively correct, a storyboard for the soul. But the mystery deepens when we look for a stricter, more numerical order. The spells are numbered in modern scholarship, from 1 to roughly 190, but these numbers are our own invention, a convenience for study. The ancient Egyptians did not number them this way. Their organization seems to have been guided by thematic clusters and ritual function, not a rigid count. Yet, the possibility of a hidden sacred geometry is tantalizing. The Egyptians were master architects and astronomers, deeply attuned to numerical harmony. Their pyramids align with celestial bodies. Their temples are built on precise ratios. Is it so far-fetched to think they applied a similar structural intelligence to their most important spiritual text? Some researchers point to the recurring significance of certain numbers in Egyptian cosmology, numbers that might form an invisible scaffold for the spells. The number 4 symbolized completeness, the 4 pillars of the sky, the 4 sons of Horus who guarded the canopic jars. The number 7 represented perfection, and the 7 celestial cows, or the 7 gates. The number 12 mirrored the hours of the night. Could groups of spells have been intentionally bundled in clusters of 4, 7, or 12 to resonate with these cosmic principles? Perhaps the seemingly variable order from one papyrus to another is not a sign of chaos, but of flexibility within a sacred framework, like different musicians improvising on the same scale. Another theory suggests the structure was mnemonically designed, not mathematically. The priests who recited these texts during rituals might have organized them in a sequence that was easiest to remember and perform, a flow that mirrored the liturgical drama of the funeral and the subsequent ceremonies for the dead. The order would serve the living practitioners as much as the deceased, creating a ritual pathway that physically and verbally enacted the soul's journey. The greatest clue to an intentional structure may lie in the few surviving master copies or scribbled templates found in temple libraries. These rare documents, used to train new scribes, show a more standardized sequence than the personalized scrolls in tombs. This implies the variation we see was a customization at the point of sale, but it branched out from a more formal, priestly archetype. That archetype, now lost in most of its purity, likely held the original structural logic. Deciphering this potential code is like trying to reconstruct the original composition of a symphony when we only have individual musicians' parts, each with their own slight variations. We can hear the melody, we can feel the emotional progression, but the full, intended harmony of the conductor remains just out of reach. The structural mystery of the Book of the Dead ultimately asks us whether the ancient scribes saw this collection as a mere toolbox of spells, or as a single, grand literary and ritual composition, a divine algorithm where the placement of a spell was as important as its words. The order itself might have been a silent spell, a hidden map within the map, guiding the soul not just by what to say, but by when to say it. The structural logic of the spells may be hidden, but their influence flowed outward, seeping into the bedrock of Western esoteric thought. Long after the last priest of Ammon closed a papyrus scroll, the core mysteries of the Egyptian afterlife began a strange migration. They did not travel intact, but as fragments, whispers carried on trade routes and through conquered lands, finding new homes in secretive philosophies that hungered for ancient wisdom. When Alexander the Great founded Alexandria, he created a colossal cultural crossroads. Greek philosophers, Jewish mystics, and Egyptian priests suddenly shared the same bustling city. In this fertile ground, ideas cross-pollinated. The Greek concept of the psyche, or soul, encountered the detailed Egyptian maps of the afterlife. The result was a new, hybrid spiritual current known as Hermeticism, a tradition attributed to the mythical sage Hermes Trismegistus, a Greek fusion of their god Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth. Here, the echo is unmistakable. The Hermetic texts speak of a celestial ascent of the soul, a journey past hostile archons or ruling powers that guard the spheres of the planets. This mirrors, with a philosophical twist, the Egyptian soul's perilous navigation past the demonic gatekeepers of the underworld. The goal shifts from the field of reeds to a sublime reunion with the divine source, but the architecture of the journey, a guided passage through hostile tiers toward enlightenment, feels deeply familiar. It is as if the detailed ritual roadmap of the papyri was abstracted into a metaphysical diagram. Similarly, in the shadowy world of Gnosticism that emerged around the same time, we find a dark reflection of the weighing of the heart. Gnostic sects viewed the material world as a flawed creation, a prison crafted by a lesser, ignorant god known as the demiurge. The soul, a divine spark trapped in flesh, yearned to escape. To do so, it had to traverse the layers of the cosmos after death, but here, the guardians were not simply testing knowledge. They were actively malicious archons who sought to capture the soul, to trick it into reincarnating and remaining trapped. The Gnostics' secret passwords and divine names needed to bypass these entities directly parallel the Egyptian spells where the deceased declares, "I know you, I know your name," to the demons at the gates. In both systems, liberation depends on possessing hidden gnosis, or knowledge, a spiritual insider information that forces the guardians to submit. The courtroom of Osiris transforms into a more sinister bureaucratic maze, but the principle remains: salvation through secret words. This filtered Egyptian influence even touches the edges of early Christian imagery. While Christian theology is fundamentally different, emphasizing faith and grace over ritual knowledge, some artistic and literary motifs suggest a cultural osmosis. The vivid depictions of the Last Judgment in medieval art, with saints and sinners separated to the right and left, recall the stark dichotomy of the justified and the devoured in the Hall of Maat. The concept of a post-mortem assay of one's life, a reckoning based on deeds, resonates with the psychic weight of the feather, even if the mechanism is divine, will rather than a physical scale. These are not direct borrowings, but rather a shared vocabulary of ultimate justice that the Egyptian model helped to write. Centuries later, during the Renaissance, a fever for all things Egyptian reignited. Scholars, mistaking the age of the Hermetic texts for the age of the pyramids, believed they had rediscovered the pristine, original wisdom of mankind, a Prisca theologia that predated and informed Moses and Plato. This Egyptian mystery became a powerful obsession. Magicians and alchemists like Giordano Bruno and John Dee pored over these texts, convinced that the hieroglyphs on newly imported obelisks held the keys to lost magical power, the very Heke the ancient scribes had encoded. They were, in a sense, trying to read the Book of the Dead without the Rosetta Stone, projecting their own desires onto the symbols, yet perpetuating the legend of Egypt as the keeper of profound arcana. This fascination never died. It flowed into the ceremonial magic of the 19th century Golden Dawn, whose rituals are steeped in Egyptian god forms and symbolic landscapes. It pulses in the modern occult, where the concept of navigating an astral plane after death, armed with specific names of power, is a direct descendant of those papyrus instructions. The mystery here is not one of plagiarism, but of transformation. How did these specific, culturally rooted rituals for preserving the self become universal symbols in the search for transcendence? The answer lies in the power of the original questions. The Egyptian texts gave concrete form to humanity's deepest anxieties about death, judgment, and identity. When their civilization faded, the forms persisted, stripped of their original context but retaining their emotional and symbolic power, ready to be adopted by anyone seeking a map for the unmappable journey of the soul. They provided a grammar for the afterlife that the Western esoteric tradition never fully forgot. That esoteric legacy of hidden names and cosmic maps took a sharp, sensational turn in the winter of 1922, when a different kind of spell seemed to crackle to life in the Valley of the Kings. The world was gripped not by spiritual insight, but by a headline, The Curse of the Pharaohs, ignited by the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. This modern mystery, a potent cocktail of coincidence and superstition, finds a bizarre and twisted root in the very papyri we have been exploring, specifically in a quiet, protective incantation known as Spell 7. The ancient text is titled, For Repelling a Foe. It is a straightforward piece of magical defense, meant to be spoken by the deceased to ward off any hostile spirit or demon that might attack them in the afterlife. The spell calls upon the gods to drive away the enemy and cause him to retreat. It is a shield, not a sword, designed for protection in the realm of the dead. Yet, when the first breath of desert air entered Tutankhamun's sealed burial chamber after 3,000 years, and when Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's financier, died months later from an infected mosquito bite, the public imagination performed a dramatic act of reinterpretation. They took the ancient concept of a post-mortem protective curse and projected it forward in time onto the living. Spell 7, and the entire protective ethos of the funerary texts, was twisted into a preemptive vengeance against any who dared disturb the pharaoh's eternal sleep. The media frenzy was immediate and global. Newspapers sensationalized every subsequent death of anyone remotely connected to the excavation, weaving a narrative of supernatural retribution. They ignored the archaeologists who lived long lives, like Howard Carter, and focused on the tragic but explainable misfortunes, spinning them into a cohesive, terrifying myth. This was the birth of the modern mummy's curse as we know it. But why did this idea find such fertile ground? The answer lies in the powerful fusion of genuine ancient belief and modern romanticism. The Victorians and early 20th century public were already fascinated by Egyptology, but they viewed it through a lens of Gothic horror and imperial adventure. They knew the Egyptians believed in potent magic and feared the wrath of the gods. When real tombs were opened, that abstract knowledge collided with tangible, awe-inspiring treasure and the mummified remains of kings. The human mind, seeking pattern and meaning, connected the dots between ancient protective spells and modern tragedy. It felt like a confirmation of the power they suspected those old scrolls held. The curse legend, however, reveals more about us than about the ancient Egyptians. It reflects our own deep-seated anxiety about violating sacred spaces and facing consequences from a past we do not fully understand. It also shows how the Book of the Dead, a deeply personal guide for salvation, could be stripped of its spiritual nuance and reduced to a plot device for supernatural horror. The real Spell 7 was a whisper for safety in the unseen world. The modern curse is a shout of fear from our own world, a testament to the enduring, if misunderstood, power that these ancient words still hold over the imagination. They were never meant as traps for future explorers, but as keys for the departed. Yet, in transforming them into a curse, we acknowledge their original intent, protection, while completely inverting its direction and its target. The Curse of Carnarvon was a modern myth, but the real magic was always in the details of the papyrus itself. Look closely at any fine copy of the Book of the Dead, and you will notice something strange. The beautifully painted illustrations, or vignettes, do not always sit neatly above the spell they seem to illustrate. Sometimes, a scene of the weighing of the heart will appear several columns away from the spell, describing that judgment. Other times, a vignette of a monstrous demon will float in the margin next to a spell about sailing on a celestial river. This is not a mistake by the scribe or artist. It is a deliberate, pervasive, and deeply puzzling pattern. Why would an ancient Egyptian, for whom every symbol held power, allow such a disconnect between the image and the text it was meant to accompany? This is the unsolved riddle of vignette placement, and it suggests we may be fundamentally misunderstanding how these scrolls were meant to function. Our modern minds want a one-to-one correspondence, a caption under a picture, but the Egyptian mind operated on a principle of magical synergy, where proximity was not about direct labeling, but about creating a field of influence. One compelling theory is that the vignettes acted as independent power sources. A beautifully rendered image of the god Thoth recording the verdict in the Hall of Judgment was not merely an illustration for spell 125. It was a permanent reservoir of Thoth's presence and authority. By placing that vignette somewhere on the papyrus, even pages away from the specific judgment spell, the artist was saturating the entire document with that god's stabilizing energy. The spell text was the specific instruction manual, but the vignette was the battery pack, broadcasting its charge throughout the scroll. The deceased spirit, navigating by the text, would be constantly within the aura of these powerful images, receiving their benefit no matter where they looked. This explains seemingly incongruous placements. A fearsome image of the demon Amit might be positioned not next to the judgment spell, but near a spell about safe passage on the solar bark. Why? Because the threat of annihilation was ever present on the entire journey. Having Amit's visage on the papyrus, even away from the main judgment scene, served as a perpetual reminder and a magical containment. By including her image, the scroll ritually captured and controlled that threat, neutralizing her power over the owner wherever they might be in the underworld. The vignette was a preemptive binding. Another possibility points to the scroll as a ritual object for the living, not just a guide for the dead. During the funeral, priests may have unfurled the papyrus and recited key spells. The placement of vivid, emotionally charged vignettes at certain points could have served as a visual prompt for the priest, a memory aid in a long and complex ceremony. A picture of the deceased drinking water in the afterlife, placed next to a spell about not thirsting, would instantly cue the reciter and focus the ritual's intent for the mourners present. The image anchored the spell in the physical performance, making the abstract words tangible for everyone in the room, literate or not. But the most intriguing theory is also the most elusive. It suggests the placement followed a hidden symbolic geometry, a kind of sacred layout that we can no longer decipher. Perhaps the scroll was designed as a spiritual circuit board. The vignettes were not random decorations, but carefully positioned components. An image of the Jed pillar, the symbol of stability, might be placed at the corner of the papyrus to magically fortify the entire document. A scene of the solar bark emerging at dawn might be positioned at the end of the scroll, not because a spell about dawn is there, but to ensure the entire journey described in the text culminated in that rebirth. The physical scroll mirrored the soul's journey, and the images were landmarks on that map, placed according to a cosmic blueprint we have lost. The truth likely blends all these ideas. The vignettes were functional art in a multi-layered system. They were batteries, prompts, bindings, and landmarks. Their placement was a sophisticated language of its own, where an image's power radiated outward, influencing not just one spell, but the entire spiritual environment of the papyrus. To see them as mere illustrations is to miss their true purpose. They were active participants in the magic, silent partners to the spoken words, and their deliberate, mysterious placement may be the final, unbreakable code in the Book of the Dead. Even the most rigid ritual framework contained a secret door to wild, ecstatic freedom. Among the spells for judgment and solar barks, we find a startling set of incantations that seem to break all the rules of the orderly afterlife. These are the transformation spells, where the deceased declares with absolute certainty, "I have transformed into a falcon of gold," or "I have become a serpent in the heart of the earth," or even, "I am the pure lotus that rises from the unseen depths." This is not a request for protection or a plea for mercy. It is a bold, first-person assertion of becoming something else entirely. The mystery here cuts to the very heart of Egyptian spirituality. Were these spells instructions for literal, magical shape shifting in the afterlife, allowing the soul to fly, slither, or bloom at will? Or do they point to a much older, more primal layer of belief, a shamanistic current flowing beneath the formal structure of temples and priests? Let's start with the most straightforward interpretation, the symbolic. In the highly coded language of Egyptian religion, animals were not just creatures, they were walking symbols of divine power. The falcon was the embodiment of the sky god Horus, its piercing vision and soaring flight representing sovereignty, speed, and transcendence. To say, "I am a falcon," was to claim those divine attributes for oneself. It was a declaration of spiritual elevation, of having risen above the mortal coil to perceive the world from a god's eye view. Similarly, the serpent was a creature of potent duality, a symbol of both chaos, as seen in Apophis, and of regenerative power, as it sheds its skin. To become a serpent in the heart of the earth might mean to tap into the chthonic, transformative energy of the underworld itself, to wield the raw power of rebirth. The lotus, emerging pristine from murky waters, was the ultimate symbol of creation, purity, and the sun's daily rebirth. To identify with the lotus was to assert one's own emergence from the waters of chaos into a state of perfected, radiant being. In this reading, the transformations are profound metaphors, a poetic language for achieving union with specific divine principles. The spells are less about changing form and more about achieving a state of consciousness that mirrors these sacred symbols. But what if the ancient Egyptians meant it more literally? Their magical worldview held that Heka, the fundamental creative force, could reshape reality. If a spell could open a mouth or repel a demon, why could it not reshape the very substance of the soul's manifestation? In an afterlife envisioned as a malleable, spirit-rich landscape, the ability to assume an animal form could have very practical advantages. A falcon form would allow swift travel across the vast expanses of the underworld or the sky. A serpent form might permit navigation through narrow, subterranean passages or provide a potent defense. A lotus form could be a perfect, stationary state of blissful absorption in the light of the sun. This literal interpretation suggests the afterlife was a realm of fluid possibility for the prepared soul, where identity was not fixed, but a tool to be wielded. The most intriguing possibility, however, connects these spells to a tradition far older than the pyramids. This is the shamanistic hypothesis. Across countless indigenous cultures, shamans are spiritual specialists who enter ecstatic trance states, often with the aid of rhythm, dance, or ritual, to journey to spirit worlds. A core feature of these journeys is the experience of transformation, of the soul taking on an animal helper's form to travel, gain knowledge, or battle hostile spirits. The shaman becomes a bird to fly to the upper world, a bear for strength, a fish to dive into the underworld. The parallels to our Egyptian transformation spells are haunting. Could these written spells be the fossilized remnants of an ancient, oral shamanistic practice that existed in predynastic Egypt? Perhaps, long before the rise of the state priesthood with its standardized liturgies, local seers and wise women entered trances to guide souls or commune with animal spirits. The spells in the Book of the Dead, then, would not be creating a new ability, but codifying and preserving an ancient, ecstatic technique into a formal, repeatable written formula. The phrase, "I have transformed into a falcon," becomes not a wish or a symbol, but a ritual utterance that triggers a remembered, ecstatic state in the soul. A psychic switch that activates a latent, ancestral capability for journeying. Evidence for this is subtle but compelling. Some of the earliest religious imagery from Egypt shows figures wearing animal masks or skins, likely in ritual contexts. The god Set, often depicted with a mysterious animal head, was a lord of chaos and foreign lands, realms often accessed by shamans in trance. Even the famous leopard skin garments worn by high priests in later periods could be a distant echo of shamanic ritual attire, a symbol of transformative power now neatly integrated into the state religious hierarchy. This doesn't mean every Egyptian was a shaman. It suggests that the formal, state-sanctioned religion of the Book of the Dead may have consciously absorbed and sanitized powerful, popular techniques of ecstasy, providing a safe, scripted path to experiences that were once the domain of individual visionaries. The transformation spells become a bridge. They offer a taste of the shaman's direct, unmediated power, the rush of flight, the cunning of the serpent, the purity of the lotus, but within the controlled framework of priestly magic and the guaranteed structure of the Assyrian judgment. They satisfy a deep, human craving for direct experiential union with the natural and divine world, a craving that the formal courtroom of the afterlife, for all its moral grandeur, could not fully address. So, are they literal, symbolic, or shamanic? They are likely all three, operating simultaneously on different levels of belief. For the common person, it was likely a potent metaphor of divine union. For the magically inclined, it was a real change of form in a malleable spirit world, and at its deepest root, it may be the ghost of a much wilder spirituality, whispering through the neat columns of hieroglyphs, reminding us that even in the most meticulously planned journey to eternity, the soul sometimes needs to shed its skin, spread unseen wings, and remember how to fly. But the most famous of these unique maps is not in Egypt. It resides in London, under glass in the British Museum, and its story is a modern mystery of ownership and loss. This is the Papyrus of Ani, a breathtaking 78-foot-long scroll created for a royal scribe and his wife over 3,000 years ago. It is the most complete, most lavishly illustrated copy of the Book of the Dead ever discovered, a masterpiece of funerary art. Yet, for all its beauty, it is shrouded in a provenance puzzle that fuels fierce debate to this day. The scroll was acquired for the museum in 1888 by the pioneering Egyptologist Scribe. Wally's Budge. The official story was straightforward, that it was purchased legally from a dealer in Luxor. But the details are hazy, and alternative accounts suggest a far more clandestine origin. Rumors swirled that the papyrus was not bought from a shop, but was instead found in a tomb, perhaps even the tomb of Ani himself, by local workmen and then sold under the table. Budge, eager to secure the treasure for Britain, was known for his aggressive acquisition methods during a time when Egypt had loose, poorly enforced antiquities laws. The exact tomb it came from, the circumstances of its excavation, and the full chain of custody were never properly documented. This vagueness transforms the Papyrus of Ani from a mere artifact into a permanent question mark. It represents the colonial era of archaeology, where priceless pieces of a nation's heritage were routinely extracted and sent abroad, often with little regard for context or consent. The ethical debate is stark and ongoing. Is it a rescued treasure, preserved for the world in a major museum where millions can see it, or is it a looted treasure, a vital piece of Egyptian spiritual history severed from its land and its people? For Egypt, the papyrus is a profound absence. It is the ultimate guide to the afterlife, but it cannot guide visitors in the Cairo Museum. Its presence in London is a constant reminder of a time when foreign expeditions decided the fate of Egypt's past. The modern intrigue doesn't end with old grievances. The mystery of its specific origin still tantalizes archaeologists. If we knew exactly which tomb in the Theban necropolis it came from, we could reunite the scroll, at least in knowledge, with the burial of Ani and his wife, Tutu. We could study the tomb's architecture, the other grave goods, the placement of the papyrus. This context would unlock deeper meanings, telling us how this particular version of the Book of the Dead functioned within its own sacred space. Without that location, the papyrus is a magnificent but orphaned text. Every stunning vignette of Ani and his wife before the gods is also a silent testament to a rupture in history. We can read the spells meant to ensure his eternal voice, but we have lost the voice of the tomb itself, the story of its discovery. The Papyrus of Ani thus holds a dual legacy. It is the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian funerary literature, giving us the clearest window into the hopes and fears of the afterlife. Simultaneously, it is a landmark case in the complex ethics of cultural heritage, a beautiful, conflicted symbol of how the past is collected, claimed, and contested. Its silent, painted scenes speak not only of judgment in the Hall of Osiris, but also of a modern judgment we are still navigating, about who owns history, and where a masterpiece truly belongs. The Papyrus of Ani shows us a soul striving for wholeness, but what was that wholeness meant to be? The final and perhaps deepest mystery of the Egyptian afterlife is not about a place, but about the very architecture of the self. It concerns the ultimate fate of the soul's own components, specifically the ka and the ba. These are not simple words for spirit. They are precise, technical terms for different aspects of a person's existence, and their intended reunion is the quiet, profound goal behind every spell, every offering, and every tomb. The ka was your life force, your vital essence, the spark of animation you received at birth. It was not your personality, but your sustaining energy, your divine double that needed constant nourishment. This is why tombs had offering tables. The food and drink were not for a ghost, but for the ka, to keep this foundational energy alive and connected to your identity. Without a fed and content ka, the rest of the journey was impossible. The ba, in contrast, was your personality, your unique character, combined with the power of mobility. It was often depicted as a human-headed bird, showing it could fly free from the tomb. The ba was the part of you that could travel, that could experience the solar bark and visit the world of the living. It was your conscious self on the move, but here lies the beautiful, haunting mystery. The ka was tied to the body and the tomb. The ba was free to roam the cosmos. Were they meant to be separate forever, one anchored, one wandering? The text suggests the highest hope was for a nightly reunion. The ba would return each night to the tomb, to the mummy or the statue that housed the ka, and they would merge, restoring the complete person for a moment of perfect, integrated being. This reunion was the true meaning of eternal life, a cyclical rebirth each dusk as the self became whole again. Yet, there was a third component, the product of all this successful magic. This was the ak, the effective or shining spirit. The ak was not given at birth, it was earned. It was the glorious, transfigured state you achieved only after passing judgment, after your ka was strong and your ba was justified. The ak was a being of light, a powerful entity that could act upon the world, influence the living, and dwell among the stars, and this presents the ultimate metaphysical puzzle. Was the final goal simply the endless, nightly reunion of the ba and ka in a peaceful tomb? Or was the aim something grander, for the perfected act to permanently leave that cycle behind and join the imperishable stars, the circumpolar stars that never set? Some spells passionately yearn for this stellar destiny, to become one of those eternal lights in the northern sky, a fixed point in the cosmos, beyond even the cyclical journeys of the sun. This suggests two competing visions of eternity within the same tradition. One is intimate, a return to a perfected self, night after night, in a familiar spiritual home. The other is transcendent, a final metamorphosis into a new, cosmic form of pure, unchanging light, where the individual components perhaps merge into a single, star-like act. The genius of Egyptian belief is that it likely held both as true, not as contradictions, but as stages. First, you achieved the integrity of the ba and ka, the reunification that proved you were whole and justified. Then, from that stable, eternal self, your act could also take its place among the undying stars, participating in the larger machinery of the universe, while your core identity remained anchored in its sacred, nightly embrace. The silent mummy in the tomb, the bird-shaped ba soaring with the sun, and the distant, shining star were not three different fates. They were three aspects of a single, triumphant soul that had mastered the greatest journey, learning that to live forever, you had to become both a haven and a light. The journey through these 30 mysteries reveals a truth far greater than any single spell or symbol. The Book of the Dead was never just a collection of funeral instructions. It was a living, breathing portal into an entire civilization's mind, a detailed map of their cosmos, and a mirror held up to their most profound hopes and most visceral fears. We have seen how their vision of eternity was not a single destination, but a layered, active process. A soul could be a farmer in the field of reeds by day and a sailor on the solar bark by night, all while ensuring its heart was light enough to pass the ultimate test. We have decoded the silent language of backward-headed gods, confronted the psychological terror of a second death, and traced the influence of their secret names into the very foundations of Western mystical thought. Each mystery, from the democratization of the pyramid texts to the ethical puzzle of the Shabdi servant, shows a people grappling with the same fundamental questions we ask today. What is the true weight of a life? How do we navigate the unknown? What part of us, if any, endures? Their answers were not philosophical abstractions, but practical, magical technologies for the soul, built from observations of scarab beetles and the predictable stars. In the end, these 30 doors open onto a single, stunning realization. The ancient Egyptians were not obsessed with death. They were obsessed with life, and how to make it permanent, meaningful, and connected to the grand order of the universe. Their entire civilization was an elaborate, beautiful argument against oblivion. So, which of these mysteries resonated most deeply with you? Was it the psychological terror of the weighing of the heart, the cosmic ambition of the solar Assyrian unity, or the quiet, persistent hope in a scarab beetle? Share your thoughts below, and if you want to keep unraveling the secrets of the past, subscribe. Our next deep dive into ancient wisdom is already waiting.